Hello, my name is Neil Davidson and I'm the founder of Raw Umber Studios. Welcome to another online portrait drawing session. We've been running these portrait sessions for 21 weeks now and would like to run many more. The only way we can do that is to make them financially viable, so we're changing a couple of things. We'll carry on doing weekly portrait sessions and weekly figure sessions, and 2 of those will be free each month. On the last Sunday of the month, we'll have a free portrait drawing session, and on the second Wednesday of the month, we'll have a free figure drawing session. The other sessions will be available as part of our Raw Umber subscription. You can see our website for more details. Right, now I'll hand over to Lizet. Let's get started.
Hello everybody and welcome to another Raw Umber tutorial. This week I'm going to do something slightly different. I am going to be talking about expressions. I'm going to start with a very neutral face and then progress into various expressions. So the first thing I'm going to do is place her on the paper. And I'm going to find the 2/3 of the face. Another good point to find is the midpoint and the width of the face, comparing that to the length. So I see half of her face is roughly the same as the widest point of her face. Next, what I try to do is divide the lower third into 2 little thirds, and I can see that that second third, so the one just below the nose, is where the jawline breaks. Next I can put in the brow line, which is the top third. The eyes are roughly in the middle of the face. So I see the corners of the eyes being in the middle of her face in this instance. And all the measurements I say are, in her case, they work. At most people, they're very, very similar. Usually the eyes are in the halfway point of the face and the nose and the brows at the 2/3 marks, but this is different for everybody. Now I've got the hairline in and a general idea of her face, I can start adjusting my lines a little bit and trying to see how it suits her. For instance, I can start looking at the curvature of her brow. And the position of the wings of the nose. And what I like to do is look at how they line up versus the eyes. So are they wider than the middle of the eye or more narrow? And in her case, They're pretty narrow and they line up with the corners of the mouth. And checking how things work vertically is really important. So you can, for instance, look up the corners of the mouth first, the corners of the nose first, the eye sockets, the high points of the brow, but also horizontally you can start looking for place. So for instance, how does the bottom of the nose line up with the ears, for instance? Now next I want to talk to you a little bit about the eye. I did speak a bit about general how to draw the eye in the last session, so if you're not sure about how to draw an eye or how to draw all the features, have a look at what I did last week. But for now I'm just going to draw a general eye in following the eyeball. And later in the other poses we're going to start playing with this to get different expressions going. When you're drawing in the irises, always make sure they're roughly in the same place in relation to the eyeballs. That's why I always draw the eyeball in, so I know that the irises are doing the same. And if somebody's looking up, they're going to be a little bit higher up the eyeball. If somebody's looking down, they're going to be lower down the eyeball. Now I'm just starting to shade in the bottom half of the nose and the top half of the mouth, so the upper lip. And I can continue to shade the various features as well as the hair. And this is a neutral expression, and what I'm going to do in a 20-minute pose is change her expression using the same drawing. Now this is just something I want to do as an experiment, just to show you how different expressions can be drawn on the same face, but feel free to start a new drawing every time. Okay, so here we are for the 20-minute pose. And like I said, I'm just going to continue with my drawing, but this time I'm going to try and create a slightly different expression. So in this pose, she is sort of pouting her lips and frowning slightly. So I'm going to get going on that first. So there are some muscles in the face that are really important when you're frowning. So there's two sort of triangular muscles just at the bottom of the brow, and there is one muscle at the ridge of the nose, and these muscles are activated when you frown. So you get a little wrinkle in the nose and two sort of V shapes at the brow. When you're frowning as well, or when you're squinting as she is in this time, in this particular pose, the lower lid will rise up. So the top lid actually only rises when you're in surprise. Usually the iris is sort of stuck to the top lid, so you can notice that if you're looking down, the iris follows the eye looking down. When you're looking up, the iris is still attached to that top lid. The top lid very rarely leaves the lower lid alone. And so when you're squinting, yes, the top eyelid does go down a little bit, but mainly the lower lid goes up. And that's what we're seeing here. And that also means that you do see the sort of shade of the eyeball a little bit more in the lower lid. With the nose, as you squint, both nostrils will go wider and they will go slightly up. So they're being lifted by a tall muscle that goes all the way from the lip along the nostrils into the corners of the eyes. And that also means that there will be a deeper sort of shadow shape on the cheeks, on the side of the nose. So you can see the sort of general muscle around the brow and then the general round muscle around the eyes. Around the mouth, there's actually a sort of round muscle surrounding the lips, and that gets pulled when you put your mouth into different expressions. So there's a load of muscles that sort of pull that round muscle around the lips into different directions. And then finally, you also have a very interesting muscle, the chin. Normally muscles pull, but the chin muscle actually pushes your lip up. So if your lower lip goes up, you're activating that chin muscles, and that's why you can also see a slightly darker accent on the side of that chin there. And you can see how the V of the cheek, sort of that shadow in between the corner of the mouth and the cheek, follows that sort of round shape of the muscle of the mouth. I'm just drawing that in now. When you're pursing your lips, the lower lip will be more narrow, and the sort of plane, the thicker bit, the middle bit of the lower lip will sort of stand out a little bit more. So I'm giving that a bit more shade. And now I can start generally shading the rest of her face. Now I want to explain something about the mouth, so I'm just going to do a little drawing demo on the bottom there. So the top lip is generally this shape. It dips in the middle into a sort of little heart shape, then lifts up on the top of the heart shape, then sort of goes down into the corners of the mouth that are mostly horizontal. The lower lip is actually usually not in shadow, so I tend to not even draw it in and just draw the shadow underneath it. Now you can imagine that that muscle that I spoke about earlier sort of sits around that in a sort of circle. And that finally we have the block of the chin that lifts that lower lip up. Now there's a few muscles sort of pulling that big sheet of the mouth in several directions. There's two muscles on the corners of the mouth that go towards the chin. They pull the corners of the mouth down. Then there's two muscles from the corners of the mouth that go and attach on the top of the cheekbone, and they are activated when you smile. So you can imagine that the lip muscles are like a big sheet pulled in different directions. And then there's this big sort of muscle on the side of the nose that goes all the way along the side of the nose and sort of follows along towards the inner corners of the eyes. So those are the main muscles of the mouth. And like I said, you can imagine how that sort of gets pulled in different directions. And you can also see why it makes sense that when you lift your upper lip, the nostrils also get lifted. So because they're basically in the same area as that big muscle that goes past the nostrils. Okay, so I'm just going to continue shading for a little bit. And I'm just trying to get some more shapes and make it look like her. I've kind of done a bit of a generic expression, generic stuff that happens in the face, but what I'm trying to do now is sort of make it look a little bit more like her. And in the last 30-minute pose, I will be changing this face into another different expression. Okay, so here we are for the final pose, and as you can see, she's got a sort of a surprised expression on her face right now. So I'm going to try and change what I've got into a completely different expression. So first of all, there's two muscles on the brows. Of course, if you're surprised, the brows lift, and there's two big muscles sort of attached on the wider point of the skull that sort of help you lift those brows. So I'm going to start bringing those up. And I also find it really interesting to see how actually, if I lift one brow, you can see how different that already looks like. It looks a little bit disdainful in a way, like she's just sort of lifting one brow. Next, as you are surprised as well, like I was saying, in 20-minute pose, the top lid also goes up. And in this case, as you can see, there's actually a bit of white on the eye on top of that, in between of that top lid and that pupil. And this is one of the only times that you'll ever see that. Unless someone looks surprised, you won't see a little bit of white on the eyes or even the whole iris. But as she is looking down and surprised, you actually see that the iris is only obscured by the lower lid. Now, I just want to tell you something about the eye and how it works. When you're drawing an eye, it always has the same shape. So you've got the sort of little tear duct on the side that kind of goes down. Then the top lid sort of lifts up in the first third of the eyelid. and then slopes down gently. Now when you're surprised, everything basically looks the same except that the iris is not hanging from the top lid, it's more hanging from the lower lid. And of course that top lid will be a little bit more curved, a little bit more lifted. And like I was saying in the 20-minute pose, if someone's squinting, then those lids will be a little bit more compressed. And the eye basically has a big muscle, sort of circles around the eye, very similar to the mouth. So you can see that as a big sheet again that can compress and also pull apart. Okay, I'm just going to do the other eye now. And always when you're doing the other eye, in any position, make sure that both eyes line up. So make sure that both lids are equally high, that both lower lids are the same plane as well. Otherwise, it may look a little bit odd, like they've got a bit of a lazy eye or something like that. So even if you do have small asymmetrical bits in somebody's face, you generally want to understate that. Just because a drawing is already an illusion that we're trying to create, like an illusion of reality, and having anything that feels slightly unbelievable can sort of break that illusion. Okay, so next I'm going to be working on her nose, and of course the wings of her nose will be in a slightly different position. They're not going to be quite lifted quite that high. Now if you laugh, that sheet of the mouth will be pulled up and out, and that means your nostrils will follow because they're slightly attached to that sheet of the mouth, that sheet muscle that you can see on the drawing below, but they won't be quite as high as if you really lift your upper lip. Another thing that changes in this pose is that she's got her mouth slightly open, so that means that her jawline will drop. And I'm just going to drop everything about 1 centimeter just to start with and then see how far I get. An interesting thing about the jaw is that it doesn't only drop down, it also angles backwards. So if this would be a profile, you could see that the jaw actually goes back when somebody opens their mouth. The wider, the further back. You can imagine it's a sort of when a clock goes round, it's sort of a sphere. So the jaw sort of does the same thing. It follows like a hinge, sort of hinging just before your ear, and that's sort of where it goes back and forth. But we don't need to do that now just for this particular pose, because of course she's just straight on, which makes it a lot easier for us. Okay, so I'm just continuing dropping the mouth, and of course in this case her mouth, even her lower lip, is not actually pulled up as much, it's a lot more relaxed, so even that top lip will be lower than it was before. Another thing to keep in mind is that when somebody slightly smiles or even smiles quite a lot, the mouth does not curve up that much. Mostly when somebody smiles, the mouth actually kind of goes wider rather than go up. It's not that many people whose corners of the mouth actually lift that much. So usually when we smile, the sort of the corners get pulled very, very slightly up, but mostly they get wider. And you can see that really well on this pose. And I'm just going to continue to shade the mouth a little bit. And like I said in 10-minute pose, I know I'm continuing to draw on the same drawing. This is just because I want to show you how you can change the expression, also how it changed from pose to pose, because actually we have basically the same pose every time, just slightly different expression. So I thought that it could be fun to do that in one drawing so you can really see what I'm changing with each expression. But that being said, it is pretty difficult to erase and then adjust again, so I would recommend, especially if you are new to drawing, you haven't drawn that much before, just start a new drawing every time. And now I'm just adjusting that sort of side folds between her cheek, nostrils, and the corner of the mouth. And when she smiles, that muscle that's sort of attached to the side of the sheet, you can see on the lower diagram there, it pulls out and up. So that means that most of the skin will be bulged up when you smile a little bit, so you get a few wrinkles on the side of your mouth. And of course with younger skin, obviously they have less wrinkles, and that's because skin is a lot more pliable, whereas if you're older you'll get deeper and more pronounced wrinkles. And this is something to remember when you do a portrait and you think, gosh, I've made this person look a little bit old. Often that is because of the depth and the darkness of those folds next to the nose. If you've made them a bit too dark, the person usually will look a little bit older, so it might be useful to just slightly shade that a little bit lighter, and you'll see that the person instantly looks a little bit younger. And this is also very useful for those portrait artists out there. Of course, if you're doing a commission, you want to make sure that it looks slightly more flattering on the person, so I tend to always make those folds a little bit lighter than I would normally, just because it's slightly more flattering look. There's actually a really good blog post about this on the Gurney Journey blog. He showed a photo of Sitter Sargent plus Sargent's painting, and you can really see how he's differed certain things. So for instance, he made the face a little bit more narrow, a little bit more angular, and he's understated most of the folds in the face. So that's another way, once you know the general structure of the face and how it works, then you can start making some manipulations to make it more flattering, less flattering, depending on what sort of atmosphere you want to create in your portrait. And now I'm just starting to render using my little brush just to soften some stuff up, adding some detail as well. And I'm just going to start to work on the forehead and hair a little bit. What I like to do is, because obviously the hair doesn't have a very clear sort of start point, it's not like a wig that has a very clear line. I like to go in with my rubber and sort of stroke into that hairline, and you can see that sort of gives a softer effect, which makes the hairline feel more natural. This is often at the sort of area that breaks from the front plane to the side plane. That's usually where the hair is softest. And also, for instance, if you have male balding patterns, that's also where men usually get a little bit more, the hair gets a little bit more sparse around that area. So it's naturally already quite thin. And it's useful to make hair feel softer, more natural, because obviously hair doesn't suddenly just start. It slowly emerges out of the forehead and gets denser the further back you get. So I'm just going to shade the hair in now. And I'm just going to continue making small adjustments on the drawing to make it look more like her, to add some earrings in, that sort of thing. Of course, feel free, if you have any questions, to ask me in the comments below if you're watching this live. I'm always happy to answer any questions. And this expressions tutorial is actually a request from one of the students, I think a few weeks ago. So of course, if you have any requests or anything that you'd like me to focus on in other portrait videos, do let me know. I'm always interested. It's always interesting to try something else. Okay, so that's it for the 30-minute post. I really hope that you found this expression tutorial useful. Do let me know what you think as well in the comments, of course. And don't forget to post your work with hashtag #RawUmberLife if you're on Instagram. And hopefully I will see some of you next Sunday for the next portrait video.
Thank you for taking part, and I'd like to thank Lizet for drawing along with us today. Don't forget to post your work on Instagram and hashtag it with hashtag #RawUmberLife. As I mentioned in the intro, we're now running figure drawing sessions every Wednesday at 8 PM and portrait drawing sessions every Sunday at 2 PM. 2 of these are free every month and the rest are part of our Raw Umber subscription. You can see our website for more details. Thank you. Goodbye.